screen starts glowing and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the easy good score.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Goods, a film podcast. This is episode 180. And what month is it, Dan?
It's month. Yeah, how deep can we go, Brian? Month.
Yeah, it makes the calendar confusing because you start to forget what month is it really. There's the month that we record, there's the month the episode comes out, there's the month in the title of the film, because that is what is defining all our entries that we're watching here in month. But it may or may not have anything to do with the content of that film. We're being entirely superficial this month.
Like Pieces of April, we recorded in, it might have been the first day of September. It might have been the last day of August. It was right around then. And it's called Pieces of April. So you think April. Okay, cool. But no, we recorded in the fall. But it's about Thanksgiving. So it was in November. And the episode's probably going to come out in September. So it's like, okay, what month are we actually dealing with here? It's too many months for one. It's like too many cooks, but too many months, you know?
Yeah, got to keep checking my phone to see what time zone I'm in. Watch out for the international dateline. But we're almost on the verge of clarity, because this is the final episode of month. And the film that I've brought for us to talk about is called The Houses October Built. So did you get a chance to check this one out, Dan?
I did. I watched this one in the sequel.
Okay, yes. There's two of them. The Houses October Built and The Houses October Built 2. I have them written down in our notes document as thob 1 and thob 2. THOB, the thob series. And so these are found footage horror movies directed by filmmaker Bobby Rowe. Basically, it's him and his friends ostensibly playing themselves in what's presented as a documentary. After all, it's found footage. So what other found footage horror movies have we seen, have we talked about, Dan?
So we've talked about Ghost Watch. I believe that's the only one. And that one's kind of like a proto found footage. That one's really interesting.
Right, that was pretty early, and it was framed as a TV broadcast, like a live TV BBC Halloween special that goes crazy because there's ghosts.
Right. And then I've seen a few others. So I found this list on Letterboxd. It's by this user, Gavin Rye. And he has collected over 2,000 found footage films into a single Letterboxd list.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot of films.
Yeah, who would have thought that many? And I have logged 10 that are on this list, which is, at first I was like, oh, that seems like a lot, about the right amount of what I would have guessed. But then I looked through it, and there were some edge cases and some non-horror entries in here that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of. And so the only horror ones I've seen beyond this, so being Blair Witch is obviously the go-to example. To the point that, like, the first couple of years after I saw Blair Witch, we didn't call it found footage movies. We called it Blair Witch style. Like, me and my friends, we were talking about these movies. Like, that just meant to us found footage. Have you seen the Blair Witch Project, Brian?
Yes, I've seen Blair Witch. I've seen one called The Last Broadcast that came out the same year as Blair Witch. Paranormal Activity, Cannibal Holocaust from 1980, which is probably the real first found footage.
Mm-hmm. I saw, as part of my Damien Chazelle, so the director of La La Land, so as part of my retrospective on his career, it turns out that his first film credit, other than his student film, is that he wrote the screenplay for The Last Exorcism 2, which is not a found footage movie, but The Last Exorcism 1 is a found footage movie. So as part of me liking La La Land, that inadvertently forced me to go watch The Last Exorcism. It's another one I've watched. And then borderline horror, thriller, whatever, is Cloverfield. I can't remember if we talked about that when we talked about Ghost Watch.
Yeah, I've seen Cloverfield, and that also is a case where the sequel is not found footage.
Yeah. And I really liked Cloverfield. I thought it was really clever. I thought it was well made. So it's something I've kind of thought a little bit about. So I also saw this movie called Devil's Due recently. That's a found footage movie. And like, the thing about found footage is you're kind of hitting almost like a loophole, like a hack on horror movies. It's like, okay, by doing it in this style, you're kind of like making it automatically immersive. Like you are in the POV of the people experiencing the movie. So it's like a hack to make it scary. Because you're in there. I mean, like it works, you know, because you're seeing what they're seeing. You're right there in the thing. If there's low production values, well, you're just a dude with a camera. So like, it's okay that it's low production values. That's not really a mark against it.
Right. And I think wasn't Blair Witch like the most profitable film ever made in history or something, or possibly Paranormal Activity?
Yeah. So I was actually just reading about this because I've been watching George Miller movies. So by percentage, it was Mad Max 1 until Blair Witch came out, and then Blair Witch blew it out of the water. And then Paranormal Activity is a dubious case because the original was like something insane, like $10,000 or something like that, and then made over $100 million. But apparently the wide distribution got a touch up in the orders of six figures. So like if you count just the original production budget, it is now Paranormal Activity. But if you include like the touch-up budget, then it's still Blair Witch. But most places you'll see Paranormal Activity listed as the most profitable film on a percentage basis in the history of cinema.
Gotcha. I was just watching a YouTube video essay about the production of the animated movie Hoodwinked, the like Little Red Riding Hood kind of cheapo Shrek knockoff.
Yeah.
And that actually went through a similar experience where it was like these indie animators made it, and the animation was done in like Russia and India, like all outsourced, and they put this thing together, but then it was well received, and then like a big studio like Miramax or something picked it up and redubbed the whole movie with like big name celebrities.
Okay, gotcha. That's interesting.
Like it didn't used to have Anne Hathaway, and then suddenly it had Anne Hathaway.
And where I'm kind of going with this is like, okay, you got these low budgets, low production values. Like my experience has been overall that like they're not very well written movies, and like they're just not very good movies in general. So like I kind of conceptually like found footage movies, and I've really liked some, but the kind of run-of-the-mill one, I can see why it was like a fad that burned out. It's kind of like the cheap 80s slasher. Like, oh, it's hire a gore effects artist and show some nudity, and that's all the movie is. It doesn't need to be good. It's like found footage is like, oh, just walk around with a camcorder and shake some things and end with something abrupt, and that's all found footage movies are. Yeah, okay, whatever. And I actually kind of get that now, because now I have the ones I've seen, you know, we'll see how I feel about the October one or whatever that we're talking about here. But like their batting average has been pretty low, although I have really liked some.
It's a mixed bag for me too. I feel like one element of the form, especially in the early cases like Blair Witch and Cannibal Holocaust, it's got that kind of forbidden feeling, like you're watching a Faces of Death thing, like, oh, maybe it's a snuff film. And that reminds me of another one that I've seen, which is called the Poughkeepsie tapes, which is like a bunch of VHSs supposedly found in the closet of a serial killer, and there was a Buzzed on Movies episode about it. That one's creepy.
Yeah, I think I think there's something to that too. Like the more of them you see, the cheaper and worse they got. Like it kind of punctured the veil of like feeling like this is real, you know? Like, I don't know. I never actually ever thought, oh, is this Blair Witch movie real? And I don't even know how many people actually did or whether that was just marketing buzz that people did, you know? But when you watch it, like your system is not used to watching movies where it's presented as if it's like a home video, like a real like a dude walking around with a camcorder. So your brain is like, even if you logically know this isn't real, your lizard brain is like, oh my God, like I don't go in that freaky house. Oh my gosh. You know, it's like, it's scary. So.
Right. It's like if Heavy Metal Parking Lot suddenly turned into a horror movie.
Right. I'd be like, oh, yeah.
Zebra Man, stop.
But a trend that I've seen that's like kind of an edge case on these found footage movies are like the screens only movies. So it's like, I think the first big one was like Unfriended or something like that. And then recently there were two, one called Searching, or I think it's called Searching. Yeah, one called Searching and one called Missing, that have the same conceit, but they're like a little more produced. And these are like, everything is live stream, like someone at a laptop or like clicking on browser windows and you see them doing that. And like, it kind of tells the story through that. And the one that I saw recently was called Missing. I found it actually very engaging. I thought it was very well done in terms of like telling an interesting story, but kind of using this limitation, but also like cheating the limitation a little bit to like make the story more interesting. So I don't know. I like that one.
And that was another one that was on the computer screens?
Yeah. That one's called Missing.
Now that you mention that, I have seen the first two entries in the VHS series, which also kind of stretches, like, that's presented as a bunch of tapes that got found, but really it's just an anthology horror movie. It's like the different filmmakers submit their different films and they try to stick with the point of view of like the camera's always handheld and it's always in the hands of a character, and they try to have a reason why the person would have a camera, but it doesn't always feel justified.
Well, the first VHS is really interesting because like 3/4 of the directors who made movies in there have gone on to be like big names either on the cult circuit or like just in general. Like Adam Wingard was one of the guys who was in that one, and he made the recent Godzilla Kong movies. And then you have T West in there too. Or I don't know if it's pronounced T or Ty West. And we're going to be talking about him because he made the X film series, X and Pearl and Maxine. And I want to bring those up this October. Joe Swanberg, who we've talked about on the pod, had an entry in there. Radio Silence, who made Scream 5 and Scream 6, had one in there. And you should see Ready or Not, Brian, if you haven't seen Ready or Not that they made. I think that's their best movie. But yeah, it's the first VHS, at least, is kind of an interesting collection of talent, but I've only heard mediocre reviews on the anthology itself.
Yeah, mixed bag. And found footage also has like experimented with other genres too. We had that one where it was superhero kids called Chronicle. Isn't there one called like Party X or Project X or something?
Yeah, Project X is wild, dude. Because, well, it like, again, I'm not used to seeing teen comedies like with a dude walking around with a camcorder. And so like it's a little more intense than you're used to in terms of like giving you the sensation of a party. And it goes to some like pretty extreme moments that again hit you more because you're just kind of not used to that. Another one that is on the list that I had is this one called Language Lessons. So have you heard of this one, Language Lessons?
No.
So I liked this one a lot too. It's a sort of romantic comedy. It's not exactly a romantic comedy, but it's told entirely in Zoom chats, kind of like the Unfriended, but it's like set in the pandemic. I don't think they explicitly mention it being the pandemic, but it's like all Zoom, so you kind of know. And it was made in 2021. And the premise is like one guy is getting Spanish lessons. And the way that he's getting Spanish lessons is he's Zoom chatting with this woman played by Natalie Morales. who is also the director, who lives in, I forget which country, it's like Colombia or something like that, teaching him Spanish. And like, as they do these Spanish lessons, you get more of their lives in like the background and like the things that they're talking about, because they're like practicing talking about the things that they going on with them and stuff. And so it's kind of a really interesting conceit on a way that we get to learn about them.
Yeah, I'd definitely be game to watch some more of these. As with some other horror films, they tend to generate a lot of sequels often.
It's because they're so cheap to make, yeah.
Yeah. And I also picked it because I wanted a little taste of Halloween, little taste of October. It's not too far away. We're almost there. We're definitely into spooky season. It creeps earlier each year. I was reading a Facebook comment the other day. Somebody was really, like, unnecessarily cheesed off at the notion of spooky season. It doesn't need to be a season. Not everything needs to be a season.
Is that what he sounded like?
Well, it just text, but I think the inflection was there.
Yeah, in your head, that's what it sounded like.
I think this film, The Houses October Built, might have grown out of a earlier 2011 version. There's a listing on Letterboxd, Houses October Built 2011, and they have an entry on their like filmmaker website about it, but I couldn't find what this is. It's possible it was like more of a straight documentary. So if you've got this, send it our way. I would be curious, but didn't track it down.
Maybe I'll look it up. Yeah, I don't know.
It's not super important.
It's a pure documentary, is your understanding?
That's my thought.
Okay.
But it doesn't really matter. The Houses October Built, the official one, the one you're going to find if you Google it, came out in 2014, and it's presented as a documentary about haunted house attractions. Like Halloween Horror Nights at Universal, or Hallow Scream at Busch Gardens. What's your history with haunted house attractions, Dan?
I've been to a couple of I went to one in college. I've been to like a couple of like local festival type quasi haunted houses. And I mean, it's kind of interesting. It's like you get some spooky flavor and you're kind of immersed in it. And sometimes you get a good jump scare in there. Sometimes you just get to look at some cool like props and production values that like kind of replicate this sort of spooky scene. And I mean, I like the gentle flavor of a haunted house, and I don't even mind a little bit of scariness. It's never even occurred to me that like I would want anything more intense than that. But what about you, Brian?
I'm pretty similar in that I do go to haunted house attractions pretty much each year nowadays, but I'm not looking for anything beyond you're walking through some kind of building and there's tableaus, there's scenes, and I kind of like that the scenes can be very different one to the next. It makes the house seem bigger than it really is. Mm-hmm. Like each room you're walking into is actually transporting you somewhere else. And I've been to a few around here. I'm not as well traveled as these folks in the movie, but a good one around our area is called Paxton Manor. That's a good one. I think that's in Lynchburg.
Okay.
I know that there's Field of Screams. I think there's one in Pennsylvania, one in Maryland. That's supposed to be good. I haven't made it out there. The one I routinely go to is at Cox Farms, where it's out in the cornfield, and they have some good stuff. It's always fun.
Do they have a haunted house there? Because I've been there, but just for like their generic fall stuff.
Yeah, they have family stuff during the day, and then like Friday and Saturday nights, they have scare actors running around through the corn maze is one quote-unquote house, and then there's one like in the woods. Oh, and there's a hayride that you ride through, and they're running after the wagon.
Okay, gotcha.
So that is a lot of fun. I'm definitely going to be hitting up Cox Farms this season. Oh, one that I did back in 2019 was I went to the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay, so it was this house that a wealthy widow built in the 1800s, and she was like very into the spiritualism movement. Her husband was the Winchester who invented Winchester rifles, like the gun that won the West. Apparently killed a bunch of like Native Americans and stuff. And she came to fear through like the various mediums that she was consulting with that like vengeful spirits were going to come for her because of this Winchester blood debt. And so she hit on the idea that she was going to keep building this house, and like if she never stopped, she would never die. And if she like built it in a very convoluted way and slept in a different room every night, like the ghosts wouldn't find her. And so it's this huge rambling house, and it's got like doors that don't lead anywhere, and the architecture is very strange. Like the head architect changed many times, and it eventually passed into the hands of the state and became like a Gravity Falls type attraction. It's out in that part of the country. It's like well, not the northern part of California. It's like halfway down California. Anyhow, I was out there in 2019, and I found out they were doing a haunted attraction in the Winchester Mystery House, which is not how it normally is. This was like special for Halloween, even though it was like September 10th, like we're sitting down today. And I was like, oh my God, I got to do that. And it was really cool. It's a historic house. It's already interesting, but it's a really big house. So it was a really big haunted house. It was good. I recommend it if you get the chance.
That sounds interesting, yeah.
But I know that a subset of the people who like haunted houses do like to push the envelope, do want something more, apparently, and are out looking for these extreme houses. And what makes them extreme, I guess, like, there are different stages. There's ones where you know nobody's going to touch you, and then there are some where they can touch you. At Cox Farms, they can touch you.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, they can. But then there are some people who I guess want to have more danger, which means, I guess, actually pain being inflicted. You're getting hurt somehow. Doesn't appeal to me. At the face.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought a whole lot about this in the past week. I completely agree. Like, I have absolutely no interest in, like, I don't know. In the concept of an extreme haunted house, and here by extreme, I mean like one where it's like designed to inflict like intense psychological and physical damage upon you and like misery. And like, I kind of get that you might want to be scared, but like tying that with like being physically hurt, I don't know. Even like being like fearing for your life scared, which I guess like, how can you be that scared if you're not actually being hurt? Maybe that's like the why they include that. It's like I don't know. I kind of want, why do people want it, Brian? What's your take?
So I think the specific case that raises the most interesting questions about this is McCamey Manor, which I think you had not heard of this before this week, right, Dan?
Correct.
Okay, so this is the one that for years I'd been hearing about it this is the one where you really get tortured. You have to sign a waiver and you gotta seek out this one guy in this specific place, and he can do anything. And I never really looked too deep into it. I just thought, I wonder how that's even legal. And then last year, my friend Ben sent me a YouTube documentary of a guy who actually went through all the steps of tracking this person down, this McCamey, and actually doing the experience. And, like, the guy has a website and, like, advertises that it's this big warehouse-sized obstacle course, and he's got all these large infrastructure features constructed, allegedly. But then this YouTuber went out there, and basically none of it is real, and the guy just, like, puts handcuffs on you and sucker punches you, and, like, is especially rough with the women, and the men he mostly just, like, makes do yard work. So it really just seems like it's a power play by this one guy who has a sadism fetish. And he's, like, recording the whole thing.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds pretty dumb. So, like, but I don't understand that, because the Wikipedia page says there's a waiting list of over 24,000 people. So is it just, like, all made up and this thing doesn't actually really exist?
Maybe. It also says in the Wikipedia article, more recently than that YouTube video that I watched, that he's been arrested for something. So I don't really know. It's odd. I think Hulu recently did a documentary about it, so feel free to check that out. I definitely do need to do some more reading up on the latest developments.
Well, the guy who made the YouTube video, which you sent to me, and I didn't get around to watching, it wasn't that long. It was only like 20 some minutes or something.
There's also several parts to it. Like, he's kept up with it.
That's what I was going to say, is like he's released follow-ups, it seemed like. So maybe there is more to the story there.
But I think the crux of this whole thing is the question of, why do we watch horror movies? Why do we read horror stories? Like, how can you be scared vicariously? Why would you want to be scared vicariously if there's, like, does there need to be danger? If there's no danger, what are you scared of? And, like, but also, why would you court danger? And I think it's not a mistake that everybody in this movie is a white person. I think there's, like, an allure to danger if you're well off enough that you're not fighting for your life.
Interesting.
Like, if you aren't routinely scrounging for the necessities of survival, maybe you do feel a draw to experiencing a taste of danger.
I think there's probably something to that. And I just want to say something now that I've been thinking a lot about. I had I went on a 3-hour road trip to a wedding with my wife, and the kids weren't there. And so, like, I mean, you know, obviously I talk to my wife all the time, but when you're sitting in a car with nothing to do for 6 hours there and back, you know, you get to have a conversation. And, like, we were talking about horror movies. I mean, because I mentioned that I had watched this for the upcoming podcast, and she was like, "Yeah, why do you watch horror movies? Like, I don't get it." And so we were kind of talking about it, because the interesting thing is, like, okay, when did I get back into movies? It was in 2020 when we started the podcast, and also, like, when I joined a Discord and started following a couple of websites, and, like, coincidentally, I don't know if coincidentally is the right word, but, like, okay, you kind of got a horror vibe going, Brian. You got Count Gauntly. You like spooky stuff. The Discord that I joined, the guy who is kind of the figurehead of it is a critic named Tim Brayton. He really likes horror movies. He writes a lot about them. He treats them like high intellectual and critical vigor and respect. And I think some of it is, like, I never liked horror movies growing up. And so I think I just kind of got swept up into it. It's like, oh, that's part of loving movies, is loving horror movies. And so am I just tricking myself into liking them and, like, letting other people rub off onto me? Is that actually what I personally enjoy? And there's definitely some that I just don't like. Like, this is not appealing thing to watch. Like the Terrifier movies, it's just, why, like, would you subject yourself to that much gore? Like, how is it fun to, like, watch a simulacrum of a human suffer this much? Like, I don't know. And then, like, anything in the torture porn genre, like, it's just not appealing to me, both that, and there's like kind of this whole grimy vibe to it that's just kind of gross. But I don't know. I think also like it's a little bit like it's been compared to spicy food to me. And I've also heard this about like just in general violence or action in movies. Like spicy food. It's like it brings out the flavor of the things around it to get a little bit scared. Spicy food, if there's some spice, it makes the food more flavorful. You notice the flavors more. It has more of a memory feeling to it, you know? And I think being scared is a little bit of that. But I also think there are deeper psychological things going on with it. And I think some of it is what you said. But I also just think it kind of even goes back to like the cradle. It's like peekaboo. I don't know. It's like that's kind of what we're watching a horror movie as an adult is. It's the adult version of playing peekaboo with your dad, you know? It's like, oh my God, oh, good. They survived. Or, oh no, they died. But like, I don't know. I think also, for whatever reason, like super intense movie fans, particularly like the ones that are kind of weird, are also like irrationally obsessed with like horror movies and finding the weirdest ones and most obscure and darkest ones and stuff. And like, I bet you could like write a dissertation on that from like a psychological or sociological perspective. Anyways, I just kind of tossed a lot of things out there, Brian, about horror movies.
I think you're onto something. What bugs me about horror fandom is it feels like at a certain point there's an expectation that you're going to watch everything that comes out in the genre. It's like, oh, did you see Megan? Or did you see Longlegs? Or there's always one. And it's like they pace it so that conceivably you could see them all, like all the widely released ones. But it's like, what, you're just doing that all the time? Is that... I am not doing that all the time. It's like that's a burden. That's homework.
Well, I think that's movie fandom in general. Like, I don't know if that's horror. I guess horror is like kind of, it's, what is it? I'm trying to think of what the comparison is. It's like the only genre that has a self-sustained streaming service dedicated specifically to that genre, and that's Shudder. So I do think you might be onto something, that in the sense that like horror in some ways operates in its own bubble, like with its own fans and its own rules and stuff more than other genres do, like comedy or drama or sci-fi.
But you're right that with movies in general, there's some of that same thing, but even harder work because there's more of them, because there's more than one genre.
Yeah. Books are the worst about that, by the way. Too goddamn many books are released. It's so intimidating to be like, how many books are out there to read? Oh my God. It's like, you couldn't even spend your whole life reading a list of all of the books that are out there, let alone actually reading them.
If it's not apparent, listeners, these aren't plot-heavy movies, so we don't need to spend too much time on recapping. It's more about the project, the nature of what they're doing.
So I do kind of wish that I had known that these guys, this group, were documentarians. And I think I kind of want to think a little bit about that as we go through the first one and particularly get to the second one, because that might have colored my perception a little bit differently. But anyways, we can keep that on our brain as we go.
Right. I forget how this one came on my radar, but I always liked the title and the idea that this is going to be one where they're walking through haunted houses and something goes awry. Well, remember, listeners, at the end of last episode, I said something goes awry. And Dan said, well, it wouldn't be a horror movie if nothing went awry. Well, okay, let's see what happens in this movie. Let's see whether or not anything goes awry. Taking bets now. It opens up, well, I thought it was going to open up with documentary, like they're introducing the documentary, but the very first thing is there's like a text card, and it says that this footage was mostly shot by a group of independent filmmakers, but also partly shot by members of a secretive haunted house society called the Blue Skeleton. It doesn't really tell us what the Blue Skeleton is yet, but there on the title card is Blue Skeleton. Then there's a shot of a girl, a young woman, being loaded into a truck, like the trunk of some kind of vehicle, and she's tied up and she seems to have blood on her. But then she like stirs around in the trunk and looks around. So what's your thoughts in this very first piece of the movie, Dan?
So I was not getting strong, encouraging vibes here at the beginning because, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I get too into the weeds on storytelling specifics when I watch too many movies. But like a pointless in medias race is it's become a pet peeve of mine. And this is a pointless in medias race. Like they're throwing us into look at this horrible thing that's happening to a person. And then I think, don't we shortly have to get like a 6 days earlier card or something like that? So like, I don't know. I just thought this was really dumb. It's like, okay, I'm not like, oh my God, how are we going to get there? It's like, okay, well now it's stupid because I already know something bad is going to happen. Like I feel like that's, rather than make me intrigued, that's sucked out the tension a little bit.
Right. There's like 3 or 4 things wrong with this opening. And yeah, one is you don't need it. Just start with them starting the documentary. Because you're spoiling already that there's this evil secret society group. Like, you're telling us, and you're not showing us, you're telling us that in the text. And then they're loading her in this trunk, and you think, oh, shit, is she dead? And she immediately starts moving around and looking around. So no, she's not dead. So this is pointless. It's deflating the movie from the jump. And then, yeah, immediately we jump back to, hey guys, we're making a movie.
Right. It's a little bit Blair Witch, because that's the premise of Blair Witch. And I mean, to some extent, that kind of makes sense, because why else would you always have the camera running? That's always a problem with found footage movies. Why would you plausibly be having a camera running this whole time? In Cloverfield, they just don't even bother answering the question. It's just like, okay, the camera's running the whole time, fine. In other movies, like in this movie Devil's Due, which was the first movie by Radio Silence, who I brought up a minute ago, the thing there is like, okay, the main characters stop filming at some point, but like the bad guys have installed hidden cameras. And so then the back half of the movie is filmed on hidden cameras. Okay, that's kind of cheap, but it's still, at least there is an explanation there, you know?
Yeah. And that's how Paranormal Activity is, that it's all CCTV, like cameras set up around web cameras that are just running.
But like saying you're making a movie is a reason why you would have a camera rolling. So that kind of makes sense as a framing story.
Yeah. Also, some of the earliest cases of found footage, like Cannibal Holocaust, like Blair Witch, it's these filmmakers and they go out into a place and then something killed them, and later the footage was found and brought back. And so it's presented kind of like not continuous shots, but like unedited. It's like, what did it get this day? Then what did it get the next day? And it's like things get creepier, and then eventually something kills them, and that's the end of the footage, so it's the end of the movie. But here, you've got it set up that it's been like heavily edited, and who the hell edited this movie? And who is distributing it? What are we actually watching that is this presentation? It's not a bag of footage. It's been like manipulated by the skeleton cult. To what end? Like, are they showing this at a film festival?
Right. I mean, again, you never actually think that this is really what happened when you go and see these movies. But I completely agree that this one totally botches. It goes too far on the suspension of disbelief. Like I said, it takes your brain too much out of the sensation of like, oh, this is what it would be like if we actually just found the video in the woods and hit play. Oh my God. Like, that's the conceit of Blair Witch, and it works, you know? But here it's got not just this weird, like, oh, title card thing, and then we're hopping to a late scene, but now we're edited back to the beginning. But also we have edited in all this footage of like news and interviews and stuff that's also would clearly have to be edited in. And I agree with you that it pierces the veil, the suspension of disbelief veil.
But credit where credit is due. I still liked the hook, which is like the one thing I knew about this movie, which is they're in an RV and they're going around to a bunch of haunted attractions, and they're going to like travel through the South and hit a different haunted house each night the week leading up to Halloween. So like, that sounds fun. I would go on that road trip.
I mean, kind of, but like from the start, they're like, we're going to hit this extreme bullshit, man. And I'm like, okay, fine. You can do that. That's not interesting. I mean, I guess like I'm curious about it. Like if you're going to make a documentary about it, okay, maybe. But like, I didn't want to be in that RV. Like I was never being like, boy, this would be a nifty time to go like have someone break a glass bottle over my head and call it a haunted house. Wow. Gee whiz.
Yeah, I liked the angle that they're going to interview the people who work there and like get the haunt actor's scuttlebutt. Actually, this week, because we're recording in early September, and I work with non-union actors, inexperienced actors, people who are willing to work with inexperienced directors, and one of them from my last project reached out to me and was like, hey, they're taking haunt actor auditions. You want to come with me to a haunt actor audition? And I didn't go because I'm usually busy on Halloween, and like that's when you'd be working if you're a haunt actor. But I have some connections in the scene, I would say.
So you could be one of these guys. That's what you're saying. You're like 2 steps removed from being one of the people in this movie.
That's right. There but for the grace of God. And so when they're questioning these people like, what's the sickest thing you've ever seen or heard about in a haunted house? Like, it's silly, but I thought it was kind of seasonally appropriate. Like, it got me in the mood. It got me in the Halloween mood, like this first half of the movie.
So to me, this would be like a more interesting is like a TV series. It's like, okay, let's go to a haunted house and like meet the people who work there. Like every episode is maybe 1 or 2 haunted houses, and you kind of get to go through it and meet the people who make it. And like, I don't know, like that to me is kind of interesting if it's like actually documentary. But like, I think this one, it kind of does a neither fish nor fowl thing where it's like, it kind of wants to be what Ghostwatch is, where it's like, you think that it's real, but also they work really hard to make it actually have the feeling of a horror movie. Like I never actually thought I was watching a documentary or like people making a documentary for real. I don't know. Yeah,
I could see it being a show like The Great Christmas Light Fight. One of those shows that like it's on each week for like a month leading up to a holiday, and there's a competition of, oh, who's got the best one. I would watch that. And I think the sequel is more like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a YouTuber who I watch called The Carpetbagger, who he is like on a perpetual road trip. That's his angle, is just every day of the year pretty much he's stopping at a different tourist trappy roadside attraction and doing a little video of what it's like to go there. And so I like that kind of stuff. And he does, like, starting in September, do haunted house attractions. But he's like a chubby, goofy, jolly guy. And he's silly. And he's not trying to convince you that he's being murdered.
Yeah, so I think you're spot on with the comparison of the first and the second movie. And if I had like kind of known these guys maybe had some history of documentarians, and one thing that I don't know if you said or if we were going to get to, but like they're kind of playing themselves, and I didn't realize that. Like I just thought they were actors playing characters. Like I didn't know that it's actually them supposed to be them. But it feels like a horror movie that happens to use some actual footage of haunted houses, although much of it is constructed. Whereas the second one is like footage of haunted houses, and they tacked on a little bit of a horror movie to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about the sequel. But we gotta get through the first one first. So they're stopping each night at these attractions, and yeah, they're talking to the people working them. What have you heard about that's extreme? And the group of people, kind of the protagonist, the final girl, is Brandy, who was getting put in the trunk in the very first shot. The other guys are all named what the real humans are named. There's Bobby, Zach, Mikey, and Jeff. And they're kind of all just generic white guys. And what's distinct about these characters? Mikey is, like, chubbier. I think Mikey gets the most, like, individual action after Brandy. But, and Zach. So Zach is Brandy's boyfriend, and he seems to really be the driving force of, like, he's the one who wants the extreme. And he's always framing it as, come on, guys, we came out here to see the extreme. And it's like, you did that.
Yeah. No, I mean, they're really not distinct at all. And I don't know, I thought the boyfriend was going to be kind of like the voice of reason, but then he's into it. You're right. They're all kind of like that. And just like, oh yeah, we got to do it, man. We got to go out and do it for that's why we're out here, to live this stuff. And another thing, it's interesting that is it 3 guys or 4 guys and 1 girl?
It's 4 guys. You only see 3 of them at a time because one of them's got the camera. And, like, who's got the camera seems like it changes. So it's hard to keep track.
And I would say that there's, like, an air of misogyny to all of this, which kind of goes back to what you were saying about McCamey Manor. And, like, Brandy is kind of just, like, the woman. And, in fact, a lot of times they just call her the woman, and that's it. It's, like, the dudes and then the woman who's going to be in the worst danger. And, you know.
Yeah, I saw on Letterboxd, I think one of the funniest reviews I've seen. This was for the movie Day of the Dead, the 3rd Romero zombie movie, where it's like they're down in a bunker at the end of the world because everything's been obliterated by zombies. And the review was just, this is just what living with men is like. Because it's one girl and a bunch of dudes in this, like, disgusting bunker. Some of that same feeling here in this RV.
Yeah, no surprise to me that the director, who I think is actually one of the actors, right, is a guy. I mean, it doesn't really feel like it's a movie that had a ton of creative input from women. I mean, I imagine Brandy was involved as more than just an actress, given how she's kind of playing herself. And I don't know if they're like a collective or what, or if she just got hired as an actress or whatever, but it kind of has the vibe of a collective.
Yeah. So Bobby is really the director and Zach is really the writer. I got the feeling that Zach, the character, was directing this project, but I couldn't tell you for sure. I was getting mixed up. But some of the things that the employees are saying are kind of like feeding on and stoking urban legends. They're like, oh, well, you know, sometimes they use real body parts in the scares. And there's no background checks. Just anybody could walk in and be a scarer. In the wake of that, the filmmakers have a little discussion where they're like, well, what difference would it make if somebody scared you with a real body part versus a fake body part if you don't know? Like, if nobody's going to tell you that, what difference does it make?
But it's just all bullshit banter. Like, it doesn't have any meaning. They're just like people, like, they heard a thing and then they're like reacting to that thing. Like, I don't think that there's like a point being made here, but it is some banter that they had. So how did you feel about this, Brian?
Well, I'm not going to give this movie a good rating, but I feel like Dan is really not going to give it a good rating. That's the vibe I'm getting right now, but we'll see. I mean, I kind of liked this in that it felt like the things you might talk about as like a playground rumor or something.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. It's like the people who like obsess about this, like that's what they would be chatting about and like things they would be thinking about.
And remember also that they're asking about, oh, well, what is the most extreme haunted house? Where should we go next? We're like on the hunt for this really dangerous one. And word starts percolating of this haunted house called the Blue Skeleton, which to me is supposed to be McCamey Manor. It's presented that it moves around all the time to like avoid legal scrutiny.
Doesn't really make sense. That doesn't make too much sense to me. Because like if the legend is it's the scariest haunted house, but like it's somewhere different, then it's not, the house isn't the thing anymore, you know? I guess it's like the people who put on the house is the appeal now.
Right. Which really to me just says, like in the YouTube video, that they're just going to put a pillowcase on your head and like hit you with a dumbbell. Break a fluorescent light tube over your back. You know, something that's portable. In the first haunt that they go to, they're winding through with their camera. And again, I kind of like the hook of what if you did take a wrong turn while you were doing one of these things? Because they kind of make it like intentionally convoluted that you're winding through. It's like, what if you went through the wrong door and then you went down an alley and you just kept going and you wound up somewhere you weren't supposed to be? Like, that's kind of spooky. But they run into this woman who's got a balding baby doll mask. And she's the one on the poster. She's got like a few strands of doll hair. She's like the mascot of the franchise. And she menaces them, as a haunt actor does. And they move on, they drive to the next place, and in the lead up to this other attraction, or maybe it's after they get through the second one, they run into this doll woman again. And they're like, well, wait a minute, we drove like 150 miles from that last place, so how is she here again? And there start being a couple of these people who have like costumes that are better than the other ones. They're like visibly more expensive, more intensive in terms of production value. So they kind of stand out from the rest.
Right. And I could tell when I had a hunch that we were like using real, quote unquote, real documentary footage and like when it was constructed, because sometimes the makeup would be like, don't take this the wrong way, like Count Gauntly, like someone who is passionate about making fun, spooky stuff, put some makeup on someone, as opposed to like, oh, we hired an actual makeup artist to make something scary. And like, when it was just like, oh, somebody put makeup on someone and they're someone who likes to make cool haunted house things, it just looks like that. But when it's like real stuff, it's like, okay, this feels like this is not just them walking around with a camera, but someone that they hired in Hollywood, you know?
Right. So they stick out like sore thumbs whenever one of these real monster guys shows up.
I'm just now making a connection on this, and that is Max Magician, which like randomly there's like 3 characters that have Hollywood level makeup in there, and everybody else is like Ren Fair spent 15 minutes before the camera hit play.
Yeah, so these are our Dagdas here. It always comes back to Max Magician.
The seminal work.
The text. Yeah, so some of these other guys, there's like a hillbilly clown. There's somebody who looks like the bunny man from Burke. He's like in a bunny costume with an axe. Maybe not an entirely, so out there concept that you couldn't come with it on your own, but like the resident spooky guy in my hometown is a bunny suit guy with an axe. And they're like, they keep showing up at the different haunted houses that these people go to. And so it's like the creeping element of maybe this is more than it seems. Maybe there's a horror movie happening here. Maybe. They eventually hear that Blue Skeleton is going to be in Louisiana this year. So they're kind of wending their way to Louisiana. We're getting closer to Halloween. And they get pointed towards a bar where they're supposed to meet somebody at a bar who is gonna like give them the next clue to get to Blue Skeleton. And this bar beggars belief, I think. It's like a haunt actor bar, but are they off duty or on duty? They're like all still in the haunt makeup, but they're like sitting there drinking. I couldn't tell.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I think there's also some context leading up to this bar, and that is, it's not just that we've seen these recurring characters. It's like, oh my god, is that the same creepy faced doll? It's like, they're like menacing the group. They're like, not just in the haunted house, but like their RV. And like, oh, they're pulling off the side of the road and having a campfire for the night. And like, someone will show up and ooga booga them. And like, one of them like dashes into their RV for a while. And like all this kind of stuff with these actors that are like very specifically targeted to them. And then for me, if I'm me and I go on a road trip and like I start getting harassed by people on a repeated basis, I'm going to be like, okay, that's the end of this trip. I'm not going to be harassed anymore. I'm going home. I'm done with this. But like every time they're like, oh, well, we just got to go more extreme. I guess we got to go to the next place. And then like each thing that they go to is worse than the last. But at any point when then they're like, maybe this is a bad idea. Maybe we should stop doing this. Maybe this is not good for us if we want to not be like people in a horror movie. Like if we want to act like real people act. Like in Blair Witch, the reason that they don't get out of the woods is because their map disappears. It's like they can't get out of the woods. They try, but they can't. Here, they just turn their RV around and go home. They're out of the woods. They're not there anymore. But this, it's like, you know how they say in horror movies, it's frustrating. You're like, don't go in that door. Don't go in that door. Like, that's not an experience that I feel too often when I watch horror movies. But when I watch this, that was my experience over and over again. It's like, don't go to the thing that has the people who have been harassing you over and over again. And like, yeah, don't mess with them. But no, they just go further and further into it. And they're like, well, yeah, let's just do it. And it's like, oh my God. And the bar is the tipping point. The bar is like, all right, this is like, okay, tell us a little more about the bar now, Brian.
Well, for one, I would go to this bar.
Yeah, okay, so you would be there. So.
But also, like, so sometimes there are like niche occupation-based bars. You hear about it. Biker bars, cop bars. And it's like, it's for that sort of clientele, and they go there and they hang out. But like a cop at a cop bar is not there doing cop stuff. He's doing bar stuff. But here at this haunt actor bar, it's like half haunted house. But who are they scaring? It's like a magician conference where everybody there is a magician, and they're just like there to see each other's shtick, I guess. There's no patsies. There's no marks. There's nobody to scare ostensibly at this bar that's just for scare actors.
Yeah, but it's like, it's scuzzy. It's not just, I don't know. I feel like they're doing the kind of torture porn vibe of like, everything is scuzzy and like depressing and messed up poor people just living horrible lives and like taking it out by being freakazoids, you know? I don't know.
It is scuzzy. Like immediately these two guys at the bar horn in on Brandy in the bathroom and are like sexually harassing her. And for whatever reason, Zach or somebody set the camera down on the table, and these goons get the camera and then take it into the bathroom. And then the other guys come back and they're like, hey, give us our camera back and stop sexually harassing Brandy. And then they just kind of like awkwardly hand the camera back. And it's like that whole exchange with the camera felt totally unnatural. It's like you just wanted to have that scene and needed a way to make it happen.
And it's even worse than that too, because they're not like, they essentially like threatened to rape her on camera. Like, we're just gonna make a video with you, girl. And it's like, okay. And also at this point it's kind of ambiguous, but they're like hunting for the blue skeleton. And so like, are these people part of the blue skeleton? Not entirely clear. I guess so your take was they're not involved with it. There just happen to be like people at the haunt bar.
Well, this is key, I think, is so they're getting deeper and deeper into scary stuff, but that's what they want to be doing. like they're getting what they asked for. And so I guess the threat, the like part that makes it a horror movie is, oh, wait a minute. These are like killers. These are children of the corn. These are the strangers, and they're going to kill them, and they're going to push things too far. But let's stick with the movie and see if that ever actually happens. Because it could just be that these are extreme scare actors whose whole like thing that they do is rough you up a little bit in a scary haunted house.
Interesting. My read on it from the very opening shot of Brandy is like the movie telling us they take it too far. It gets out of hand. It turns real, not just for show, not just for play. What should just be performance turns into real violence. But I don't know.
That's the promise of the premise. We can discuss whether it's borne out. So they get down finally to New Orleans. Well, I think there's a step. It's all convoluted. It's like, it doesn't really matter what happens because we know where they're bound in the end. But like, there's a scene where a guy in a skeleton mask breaks into the RV when everybody's asleep and he's recording on a camera. And then the next day, that footage is up on the Haunt forums. And they're like, oh, geez, they're creeping around on us when we're asleep and we didn't know about it. And that's weird. But Zach says, don't tell anybody, Bobby, because we gotta keep pressing forward. They're really dedicated to continuing on, as you said.
That, for me, it's another point where I'm out. You go enter my private property and film me without my permission. I'm no longer participating in this cordial exchange.
This is my own private domicile and I will not be harassed. A little bit of Breaking Bad there.
So some of these incidents like are kind of interesting. And like if you describe them on paper, I'm like, oh, that sounds like an interesting scene that would be kind of scary. But like the combination of me not caring about these characters at all and like just feeling like they're making bad decision after bad decision, I was like just more and more like every time something bad would happen, I would be like, you have brought this upon yourself by proceeding further down this path. I don't feel sorry for you. I'm not scared for you. This is just you experiencing your own damn stupid consequences.
Yeah. On like the penultimate night of the trip, they're driving through like a field, just the middle of nowhere. And suddenly they turn and there's like this group of 50 like spooky clowns and skeleton guys out in the field. And the lights cut off. And then when they cut back on, everybody's gone. Except there's like something skewered on one of the windshield wipers. That's the last clue of, okay, meet your contact on Bourbon Street in New Orleans on Halloween, and they'll take you to Blue Skeleton. What Bourbon Street experiences do you have, Dan?
Well, I've been there twice. I went there for my bachelor party. And I was just talking a lot about that this weekend because the wedding I went to was for one of my own groomsmen, and I was a groomsman in this wedding. And so we were talking about that bachelor party back in 2012. And it was an awesome bachelor party, terrific time. And then I went with you once, Brian.
That's right. We filmed a Gauntly episode there. We did the Gauntly Halloween trip in 2016 to New Orleans, where we were hitting up horror landmarks, a lot of zombie and voodoo stops, also the Lalaurie torture mansion, and things like that. A lot of stuff inspired by Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. Classic film. And so I kind of want to go back to my footage and like match it up with the footage in this film, because I know we stopped at the Swamp, which is one of the bars they pass while they're walking around.
Oh yeah, the Swamp is a legendary bar with me and my friends because we had a very bad experience at the Swamp. So
was it as bad as this experience?
Oh God, no, not as bad as what happens here. But I did like, see, this is one of the moments where like it was starting to register a little bit that like, oh, they are actually kind of making a documentary about some of these things. Like, it's not just a constructed horror film, but like part of the purpose is to feel like a documentary of haunted houses. And so like a lot of the stuff that had seemed really stupid still seemed kind of stupid, but like I kind of reframed it a little bit. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. I sort of get what they're doing a little bit more than I did 15 minutes ago when I just thought they were all idiots in an idiot horror movie. Because the Bourbon Street footage is cool.
Yeah, I liked this part. Still dumb because one of the group gets lost in the crowd and turns down an alleyway, and immediately he's confronted by the three goons that we've come to fear, the bald doll and the mangy clown and the axe bunny. And they like rush at him. And so there's a limitation to found footage movies, which is it's hard for anybody to die because the camera's got to keep going forward. So unless like everybody's got a body cam, like you can't have a body count because the narrative has to continue. And so the guy turns the corner. Also, another limitation of the form, if the cameraman is getting attacked, like the camera is his eyeballs and you can't really see what's happening to the rest of his body. It kind of makes you clamor for like a third person view. Like, wait a minute, is he getting hurt? What is happening to Jeff right now? Did Jeff die? It was very unclear.
Sick Avatar reference. Yeah, and like I think various found footage movies have done various cheats on this, which we talked a little bit about earlier. Like, oh, you could have hidden cam footage, or you could have, you know, some other source of the video or something. But you're kind of right that there is that built-in limitation. If you just have one camera you're carrying around and mainly one person carrying it. Yeah.
The rest of the group starts freaking out that they can't find Jeff. And then they get a text from Jeff's number saying that the blue skeleton has Jeff. And that to get him back, they need to come to the scary house, I guess. Wherever the official location of Blue Skeleton is, they give him the coordinates. And come meet us here if you want to see your friend again.
You know what? I think we should introduce like some sort of organization run by the government whose job it is to apprehend lawbreakers and people who are accosting other citizens and give them some sort of justice.
If only. But they drive out into like the woods, I guess somewhere outside of New Orleans. And they encounter the Blue Skeleton group in a bus, like a white school bus with all the windows blacked out in this woody clearing. And they're like texting them, come out, come board the bus. We have Jeff, and if you want to see him, get over here. And the filmmakers are hesitating. They're like, oh no, what do we do? This is scary. And then one of the blue skeletons comes up and shoots the windows out of the RV, like with a gun. And so you think, oh, this is real. These are real killers. These are the guys pushing the envelope too far. And the crew is all hooded and forced onto this bus that the Blue Skeleton guys have. And Jeff is on the bus. So Jeff is not dead. Nobody has died in this horror movie. And they start off down the road in the custody of Blue Skeleton, all in their hoods. And Brandy is breaking down with good cause. Like, it seems like their errand has gone awry. Things have gotten real now, and people are going to get hurt. But then the bus gets where it's going, and all the men get dragged off the bus, and Brandy's left alone, and you think, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to Brandy? What's going to happen to the guys who aren't on the bus anymore? What were you thinking at this point, Dan? Probably not. You probably didn't have a high opinion of anything that was going on.
It's so chaotic. It's like, it's kind of hard to follow, quite honestly. And I mean, I was a lot less bothered by the fact that, like, has anybody actually died? Is nobody's died yet? This is how come nobody's died in a normal horror movie? Somebody would have died, because that's like a found footage trope, is like the tension of the potential death just gets dragged out and out and out. And I know not every found footage movie is like that, but I'm still thinking of Blair Witch mainly, where it's like it just all comes to a head in the final scene. And to me, this is that final scene. It's like in Blair Witch, they're going in the spooky house. What's actually going to happen? And here they're going in the spooky house too. What's actually going to happen? Is somebody going to die? You know, or are they all going to die? You know?
Yeah. To me, I guess the reason it weighs on me is we've already had a couple fake outs, and the nature of going to a haunted house attraction is that the whole thing is a fake out. Like, they're dangling the threat of death, but it's a rubber bat on a string. It's like there is nothing threatening here. So we had the fake out in the very first shot of the movie where it's like, oh, Brandy's dead and she's getting dumped in a trunk, but then she immediately starts moving around. Okay, well, she's not dead. Even in the scary in medias res future, she's not dead. Then Jeff, he gets rushed in an alley by these guys that they've built up. And you think he's dead. No, he's not dead yet. So the guys get pulled off the bus. Brandy's there alone, and oh no, something's going to happen to Brandy. And my thought was, nothing's going to happen to Brandy. Brandy's going to be fine. And what happens is one of the goons hands her a camera and says, "Film everything you see," and then pushes her out of the door. And her job is to walk through a haunted house. Like, just another haunted house. And so this is the real deal one. This is the scary, extreme blue skeleton one. And so then there's like 5 minutes where she's running through this really chaotic haunted house. And like you said, impossible to keep track of what's going on. It's just chaos. But like, she'll turn a corner and one of the guys will be in like a two-way mirror room getting like attacked by one of the goons. And then she'll run down to the end of a hallway and turn another corner, and oh no, another guy is being menaced. And I think the cameras are like cutting around. I think there's multiple cameras that people have. And it's just like everybody running and screaming and maybe getting attacked by the goons. But I couldn't really keep track of it.
Well, so here's my I'm actually going to come out on the other side here on the defense of this. Like, my read on what they were going for here, it was actually starting to make a little bit of sense to me. Because here it's like, okay, it's almost like a metafictional thing. It's like, okay, asking that question of like, why do we go to haunted houses? Like, why do we simulate the thing that could cause us death, like right up into the moment of death? You know, like these things that could be a danger to us. Why is that something that we as horror enthusiasts do? And then like traces these characters who are kind of like normal horror enthusiasts who get sucked deeper and deeper into it and then here is the culmination of that is like, hey, like if you were actually subjected to these things, it would be miserable. Like, I don't think it's filmed very well, but like the idea that like now they're in a house that kind of resembles a haunted house, and like the characters themselves are actually suffering these fates of like things that are faked in a haunted house. That is actually kind of an interesting conclusion to this, because it suggests a little more thought than I would have attributed to this film up until that point.
Well, it would be that. And I understand. It's like, be careful what you wish for, because now they've got their own medicine. They've got what they were ostensibly looking for, and it's not that great, is it? When you're getting chainsawed, or whatever the case may be. But then, like, Brandy comes running out the other end of the house, and she gets tied up, like battered some, and thrown into this trunk that we saw at the start of the movie. And this car that she's in drives out into like the desert or something, some broad, featureless expanse of land. And the final piece of the movie is all the team is there being dumped into coffins. And the blue skeleton team buries the coffins. So everybody's getting buried alive, and there's like little webcams inside the coffins, showing them and their terrified screams, and slam to the black of the end of the movie. So, that's Thob 1. The house is October built. And maybe my judgment is colored by the fact that I knew there was a Thob 2. But even so, what was your feeling at the end of The House is October Built 1, Dan?
I liked the ending more than any other part of the movie, both for kind of what I said, where it felt like now we're actually kind of deconstructing the very idea of horror, where like, oh, so is it really that you want to be this close to the face of death? And like death, a simulation of the experience of dying, is that the thing that you seek? And like the gut punch finale of that is like, we'll show you freaking death. And they put him in a coffin and bury them. Like that is where you ultimately end up in death. And like, that is also like, yeah, one of the scariest things I can actually imagine. And I didn't know that this was coming at all. Like the in medias res takes us up to her being abducted and beat up. And like, yeah, actually getting buried alive, that sounds like actually one of the worst things that could happen. And so like, this was actually a little bit stomach churning and scary in the way that nothing leading up to it was. And I didn't mind that it just kind of ended as they were like realizing their fates and screaming into an abyss and cut to black. So for me, it actually kind of worked, I gotta say. It sounds like you were on the opposite end of that.
Good. No, I'm glad that it worked. It did not work for me because still, okay, they were just running around screaming, getting assaulted in the blue skeleton house, the big dangerous skeleton house. But again, everybody comes out the other end and they're all still alive. So they come out of, like, I thought the way that it was, with how chaotic it was, I assumed some of the dudes were getting killed. And then Brandy gets beat up, but she's not dead yet either. Okay, fine. They're building to putting them in the coffins. But by this point, I was not convinced that any actual death was going on. I think the blue skeleton is a legitimate establishment that delivers what it promises, which is that it's just a haunted house attraction that toes the line, pushes the envelope, doesn't kill anybody.
Interesting. So your take was like, so the number of fake outs, I guess, like, to me, that didn't really bother me. Like, to me, that's almost baked into being a horror, particularly a found footage where you know it's going to lead to one final culmination, or at least that's my expectation. I guess you don't know that. So I wasn't like constantly feeling teased from the sense that it was fake, more so that like as they got closer and closer, it started to seem like anyone was acting rationally, I guess. But I guess I can see what you're saying. Also, even though I knew there was a part 2, this to me seems like something that you could basically do with totally new characters. And so I wouldn't know for sure that it was the same characters surviving or something like that.
Yeah, I kind of was feeling that same way watching the first one until maybe like 2/3 of the way through, when I just really started feeling that these people are not going to die. So, I think the reason that I feel so strongly that way is when you've got a horror movie where the premise is based on something that you do in the real world, where you're kind of courting something dangerous. Like there's that Killer Escape Room movie, or what, Ready or Not, doesn't that have like Killer Hide and Seek or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so cases like that where it's a sort of ritualized thing that you do in everyday life, where you're flirting with the idea of danger. There needs to come a point in the horror movie where that boundary is crossed and somebody actually gets hurt, or you've never crossed that boundary. It's just a normal thing that's happening.
Interesting. And you felt like it didn't do that? Because I actually thought that it did kind of cross over to that when they got to the final destination. But you felt like it was still just more tease.
So what I think would have fixed it for me is after the smash to black, so we had a title card at the beginning, let's just have a title card at the end that says, "We found this footage 6 months ago," or something.
Okay. Gotcha.
Just lock it in that this was like way after the fact.
Okay.
But yeah, I was just like, well, wait a minute. with how many times I've been teased up to this point, I can't take that. I can't trust that they're dead now. Cue The Houses October Built 2 in 2017. My takeaway was correct. It's all the same people still in the mix because it kicks off with, I guess it got interrupted, maybe. If you think the blue skeleton is actually dangerous, their burial got interrupted. The cops showed up and maybe took some of the goons into custody, and they rescued the filmmakers from these coffins.
Well, I think it's presented in universe as being real. Sort of.
Yeah. I still couldn't tell. I wasn't won over. I thought, like, one cop rolls up, and I think this is just a blue skeleton rep. I think he's Team BS.
Because for me, I was definitely feeling like we're supposed to accept that these guys are criminal elements. They're actually trying to kill people, or like at least gone so far into the extreme that they will never recover, you know?
Right. And I think even with what we see, there's like, they're in a gray area. But I also think that the people who are going to seek out Blue Skeleton, this is what they're looking for. And then a lot of this movie is kind of a rehash of the first one, although it jumps forward in time a bit, and the filmmakers have gained, like, notoriety. They're famous in the haunt communities because this documentary that they produced, The Houses October Built, blew up. It went viral, and so now they're a draw. And so haunted houses are inviting them and paying them to come and review their attractions. I liked this a lot.
Yeah, I thought this was pretty interesting. And to me, this is like kind of, I mean, I guess you could spin it totally differently and say, well, this is actually an evidence point that it was faked. But to me, that like we were supposed to take the whole thing as being real in the first one, just because the premise is, okay, in the aftermath of it, and like they barely survive, like everybody's kind of traumatized by it. Like what's going to be the outcome? Well, some of them, namely the guys, are going to try to profit from it. And the girl, the woman, as she is frequently called, is like, yeah, it's kind of messed up to feel like you're in danger. I want no part of this anymore. I guess it's interesting. Like the footage went viral because it was quote unquote real, you know? So I don't know.
Right. Yeah, especially the burial scene at the end and the horror that they're going through. That's like what really sold it and made it popular. And especially, yeah, that Brandy was going through it. And the guys find out that the attractions don't even want them to come if they don't bring the girl. So, like, this one is extra cruel on Brandy. And they come back to her and they're like, look, we'll give you extra money, but you really, really need to come. And they kind of strong arm her into doing this thing she doesn't want to do. Going on basically the same trip again. Go to a bunch of haunted houses. But they promise no extreme haunts this time. They've learned their lesson, no extreme haunts.
It's a little bit of a Homer, don't you eat this pie situation from the start.
And they go to a wider variety of spooky attractions. I like this. They go to an escape room. They go to like a horror makeup artist.
Well, this one really lifted the veil for me because like I didn't even feel like they were trying to make a horror movie for like 2/3 of this film. It's like, hey, here's like actually an interesting haunted place that operates in October, and we're going to spend 10 or 15 minutes walking around here under the ostensible framework that like we're profiting off of this old movie and we're really them. But like, actually they're just documentarians of this place that they went, you know, and they just tacked a horror movie on top of it.
It's like a YouTube video, and it was giving me strong nostalgia of the Gauntlet trips.
Totally. Yeah.
Also, so one of the places they go is they go to Anoka, Minnesota, the Halloween capital of the world. So apparently this town, if you read up on the history of Halloween in the United States, there used to be this thing called Mischief Night, which was on October 30th teenagers would run around like breaking windows and stuff, just doing vandalism. And I guess this town leaned into the idea of, hey, let's play up that you don't do that. You don't break other people's property. You just go door to door and you ask for candy on the 31st. And so kind of that they were the first place to really be pushing Halloween trick-or-treating. And there's like murals all over the town commemorating that this town is really into Halloween. And this was the kind of thing that I saw in a bunch of the towns that I would go for the Gauntly trips, like Roswell. All the buildings have aliens painted on them. Or in Willow Creek, California, Bigfoot painted on all the buildings. So I liked this flavor. I also think they could have done something different by having it be all northern towns this time, because the first one was all southern towns. Mm-hmm. But then, like, pretty much immediately they're down in Georgia again.
Right. So you like this element of in universe, the last movie actually happened?
I did. Yes. Because, well, this is the kind of content I watch on YouTube anyway. Mm-hmm. Just people walking around, checking out the roadside attractions. And they have a drone this time, Dan.
Oh, yeah. It's like they got drone footage for their documentary and they like have an in-story thing like, oh, and look, we're going to make it with a drone too, rather than just like having the drone, you know? Yeah.
So one of the places they go is a zombie run. So it's like a 5K, but you've got capture the flag flags on you, and some of the people are zombies, and if they grab your flags, you're a zombie. And the filmmakers are running along, and one of them is flying the drone over this big crowd doing the zombie run. And I love the vibe of this scene. It's like, that is a fun thing. It would have been cool to be there and do that.
Right. That actually looked fun to me. That was like, okay, here's a fun thing that you would learn about. Like it doesn't have the stuff that bothered me that we were talking about earlier, you know?
And they also go to a eating contest where what they're eating is brains. And like Mikey enters the brain eating contest and Kobayashi is there eating brains. Like, this is great. This is the kind of cinema verite that I'm after. Also, so 2017, Dan, was my probably deepest dive year into the haunt scene. So this year I worked at an escape room from starting in like March, and then I quit in October because I got the opportunity to run a haunted house at the Elks Lodge in Fairfax.
I remember that, yeah.
Then in October, I did that, built a little haunted house and hosted the haunted house, and you came and visited. I also bought a drone in 2017.
Oh, so you were relating.
Yeah, so that's been a part of my life since then. Yeah. So it captured a vibe. This house is October built too. And I was like loath to dive back into any of the Blue Skeleton nonsense. I was tired of Blue Skeleton.
Oh, I completely agree. I had much more fun with part 2 whenever it was just like, again, it felt like a series you would watch on Bravo or something like that of, hey, let's go walk around different interesting haunted houses for an episode, you know?
Mm-hmm. I also like the lighting. It really felt like harvest season, like the sun is low in the sky, even during the day. It's like looking at the footage, you can feel the chill in the air. But at one of these houses they go to, they're menaced by somebody in a blue skeleton mask. And the staff, they go and question them, and they're like, he doesn't work here. We don't know who that is. And Brandy says, guys, we gotta stop. Let's just not do this anymore. And they're like, no, Brandy, we need to, and you have to, and here, have some more money.
It's just so half-assed at this point. Like, at this point, I couldn't even believe that any of them thought this was real. Like, in the first one, I actually, like, bought that we were being presented a film where the characters thought the things were actually happening. Here, it's just like, it's like film school horror movie staged onto some cool documentary footage, you know?
Yeah. And the code word that they're hearing from the haunt workers this time is different. They're not saying blue skeleton. Everybody's telling them, seek out Hellbent. So that's the house they start going after, is this place called Hellbent.
Well, except they're kind of not, because the whole premise is like, oh, we're not doing extreme stuff this year, so we're not going to look for Hellbent. But then they get like coerced into being there, basically. Like,
right.
Tricked into it.
Yeah, good point. This is extreme. This is really extreme, because one of the nights they're asleep, one of the skeleton goons climbs up on the roof of the RV and pumps in like Batman sleeping gas, and then drives the RV all the way to wherever Hellbent is. This is a big step to take. I don't know if these people went to medical school. If you're going to be, anesthetizing a whole Jeep with knockout gas.
Right. And this felt faker than some of the other pranks that felt like a bridge too far in the first one. Again, more of like okay, I'm not really buying this, that this, even in universe, is actually happening,
Right. But they get there. They get to Hellbent, and again, it's like, okay, get off the bus, go do the scary house. They go inside, and they're all given these hoodies that cover their faces. So kind of like in the first one. These hoodies have skeletons, like glow-in-the-dark skeletons on the hoodies, and the hoods zip up over their faces. Like, I feel like they sold things like this at where Spencer's Gifts or Hot Topic or something.
Yeah, something, yeah.
But as soon as they suit up, they all get chloroformed. And at this point, it's like, well, how come you didn't just carry them inside while they were already knocked out? Why'd you need to knock them out again? It's like a redundant story beat. But Brandy wakes up alone, which was how it was in the first one, so they must have the guys somewhere in the house or something. And she starts running around. She's got a camera again. And she witnesses the misfortunes of these guys around each corner, except it's like more obvious this time that they're dying. Like, one of them is on fire, one of them is hanged, one of them gets cut apart with a chainsaw. So I was thinking, okay, all right, maybe I can learn to trust again.
Oh, interesting. Because I was not there.
It's like, finally. It's like finally they took my notes. They're really killing them. Then she runs out the end of the house, and she's confronted by a ring of skeleton goons who are like carrying a coffin towards her. And then this beat was like confusing to me, because she reaches into the coffin and pulls out a gun, and then all the guys react like, "Oh, where'd she get that gun?" And she waggles it, brandishes it at the skeletons, and they all recoil and take off their masks, and it's the guys. It's Jeff and Mikey and Zach and Larry and Curly and whoever these guys are.
Yeah, something like that. Right.
So, okay. Flashback like 5 minutes to well, no, not flashback yet, because what Brandy does is she sees that it's these guys who have been terrorizing her the whole movie. And now she learns they're behind this blue skeleton stuff. And she points the gun at her own head and pulls the trigger. And there's, blood splatter on the wall. We get like a 5-minute flashback to back inside the house when Brandy's running around, and the doll woman pulls her aside into like a side room where there's closed circuit cameras, and shows her that the whole thing has been a prank by the filmmaker guys, that they're in on it. And the doll gives Brandy the gun and like a blood pack squib. So it's a double fake out. And we jump again 5 minutes into the present, and her shooting herself was also a fake out. So it was like they scared her, she scared them, none of it is real. And, like, there's an argument for a little while of, how dare you manipulate me, all movie guys? Force me to do this thing I didn't want to do. I've been traumatized. And now you're just playing off of that for money. And they're like, come on, think about the money. We're making money. This is great viral content. And then the camera, like, pulls out and you see, like, the edges of a YouTube player window with the view count climbing. Like, this is all just another project that's, all for the gram.
For the Vine.
Yeah.
Well, I guess no, for the Vine is different, because here it's for manipulating the audience.
And the very final shot is a random shot of a skeleton goon changing letters around on, like, a felt board sign that it had said, "Seek out Hellbent," and he swaps the letters around, and you see that that's an anagram for the blue skeleton.
Dun, dun, dun. I actually thought this was kind of clever, because I had not caught that this was going to be a thing.
I didn't know it was an anagram, but I never assumed that the perpetrators of this thing were anybody else than the blue skeleton. Like, I think it's too much to think there's two crews out there making these illicit haunted houses. It's like, it all feels connected to me.
I see some sense to that. I mean, I wasn't giving this movie too much credit for coherency or plausibility in general. I didn't know if we were to take away that they staged the entire first movie too. I kind of went back and forth on that.
That's interesting. I don't think so.
Uh-huh.
So my take is, and this is playing off of, Buzzed on Movies has a long history of doing coverage of the Saw series. And something that happens in the Saw movies is what Teddy and Matt call Team Saw, which is that if you survive a jigsaw trap, it's like 100% guarantee you're going to start working for Jigsaw.
Why?
I don't know. But that's like what always happens, is that, like, you've gone through this transformative experience, I guess. You've passed through the fire and flames, and now suddenly you see the value in Jigsaw's particular brand of therapy, and you want to help him out. And so, like, we get all these twists and turns where the people who survived the traps in the earlier movies are helping set up the traps in the later movies.
That seems kind of dumb.
Yeah, it's weird, but this is very much like a Team Saw moment. It's Team Blue Skeleton. Once you've been traumatized at their hands, it's in a cycle of abuse. Like, you gotta pass it on.
Maybe, yeah. Except the thing is that, like, Brandy was hit by it the worst, and then she wasn't a part of staging it until, like, the very last moment when the wool had already been pulled over her eyes. But I guess she got roped into it as well. But yeah, but here I guess it's like the premise is they, like, want to recreate the fame that the first one gave them, you know? So here it's like a selfish thing. It's like, oh guys, this was for us. Like, we're going to get rich by making this viral content, and we're going to trick Brandy too. This one felt even more misogynistic to me, this film, than the first one.
Yeah, it was very rough on Brandy. And just mean-spirited. And, like, maybe they were trying to comment on that, but it doesn't really feel like much more than just furthering the like, perpetration of it.
Right. I was also picking up on that at the end. They're like, oh, we're going to have Brandy trick them. But, like, the moment first of all, the way she tricks them is by killing herself. Wow, really empowering. You really gave her the control of this one. Second of all, it's like for 30 seconds, and then we, like, cut to the explanation of what happened. And so it doesn't really feel like she actually got one up on them, you know? But yeah, I don't know.
And again, second movie ends, nobody has died. Not a one. Every time was a fake out.
Not as bug bite as you are, but I can still see it. Yeah.
The Blue Skeleton crew are just upstanding citizens, misunderstood, but they deliver what it says on the tin. They'll spook you, they'll drive you out into the middle of nowhere and leave you. They might rough you up a little bit, but nobody's getting chainsawed. These are still, at the end of the day, haunt actors who go home or hang out at the scuzzy bar.
And that's what it is.
Month in the can. So what did you think, Dan, of the Houses October build? Are we ready to say, is it good?
Sure, and then I want to do a month wrapper after that.
Okay.
But we can dive into it. So, is it good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating, toward a good, which is an 8 out of 8. So we'll start with the 2014 The Houses October Built, the original. And man, I was just like, I don't know. Sometimes I'll see a movie that makes me question my priors significantly. Like, I think I'm someone who kind of likes found footage movies. And then I watch this particular found footage movie and I'm like, not only did I not like this movie, but I might not actually like any found footage movies. Like, this might have actually like made it connected a circuit in my brain that made me realize that found footage movies are just bad.
And I'm starting to question, do I even like movies?
A little bit of that too. It's the worst case ever if you take it at least at face value of like something happens that like any rational person would be like, I'm not proceeding further down this path, because it's like entirely in their hands pushing forward. And I kind of get the point that you're saying that like, well, that's what they're trying to do. So of course they're going to push it further and further. But it just seems so irrational and pointless and unappealing in the moment that like, I just don't get it. And like the footage of the haunted houses itself is chaotic and like unwatchable. The characters are just, I didn't care about any of them. Like I was almost rooting for the blue skeleton at that point, except not quite. And there's just this whole scuzzy vibe that's just like, ugh, like the Rob Zombie Halloween movies have it too. And like some other movies from like the 2000s and early 2010s have it, that it's like the depravity is the point. It's to feel gross and dangerous, and not dangerous because that gives it a sense of romance, but just like this, the horribleness of humanity is kind of part of it. And I just don't find that remotely enjoyable to spend time in. It's just like bleak and dour. And I was just really, really hating this movie, like with a fiery passion. But the ending did turn it around to the point that I even started to kind of understand what was leading up to it. And I actually did like the end, and I thought the ending was kind of clever. And you seek out these near-death experiences, well, we're going to push that to what it actually would be, culminating with you being buried in the ground as if you were dead. And that was kind of cool. And there's like little snippets here and there that is kind of okay. So it's just going to barely eke out of a 1 into a 2 for me. I'm going to give this a not good 2 out of 8.
I'm right there with you, but kind of looking at the movie from the other side, that I like the hook at the start, except the thing at the very start with the stupid showing her loaded into the truck. They should have chopped that off. They should have just started with them climbing into the RV. I like that angle that they're making this documentary about the haunted houses and what is going to happen. Like, things are going to grow more sinister. Things are going to creep in from the edges. It just never got sinister enough for me. It never stopped being a tease. And I thought at some point it needed to more than it did. So for me, it's a 2. It feels like Halloween season. I would always, whenever they'd pull up to the next attraction, I was always kind of curious, oh, what's this one? I wonder if I could really go here.
Which to me is not like this. The point of this one is not that. The point of this one is like, it wants to be a horror movie proper. It wants to scare you. It doesn't want to be like, oh, look at this interesting place, and also here's a horror movie. It's like, it's going to be a scary movie, which it was so stupid and bad at that.
Yeah, it's not good.
Like, I should have given it a 1. I really should have given it a 1.
I thought you were going to. A 2 may be generous, but I liked the flavor at times. Then what about the second one, Dan?
Well, the second one, so I don't know. There's kind of like the old question, is it worse for a movie to be something that makes you really mad, or is it worse for a movie to just be really boring? Like, which one of those two is the worst sin? And I don't know if there's a consensus on that. Like, there have been movies that have been kind of boring that I just kind of like, okay, I'm done with it. Like, whatever. It was like fine, but it was just kind of boring. And then movies that just like actively piss me off. Like the kind of clever way to say it is like, oh, a movie that didn't make you feel anything is worse than a movie that made you feel something strong. I don't agree with that. If a movie's making me mad, that's worse than me not feeling something. A negative number is worse than 0. I would rather be like kind of bored and put off than to be like actively annoyed at the thing. And so I was like ready to comfortably say that I enjoyed part 2 more than part 1. But then like the last like 45 minutes are just like this stupid fake out, very obviously fake, worse production values, not even really trying to be scary, like recreation of the climax, but worse of part 1. And then like the dumb double fake out, but oh, it was all a viral thing anyways. Just that wasn't even remotely clever. And I don't know. So like, but I did kind of like the more of the sense that we were in a documentary, that we were like, actually the point here was to check out some interesting places with a horror movie tacked on. That worked a little better for me. Like that to me is actually an interesting hook, more so than the first one, which tries to be a real scary movie. But again, I was just kind of bored most of the time. I'm also going to give it a 2, low 2, same approximate ballpark as 1 for different reasons. What about you, Brian?
This one's going to edge just into 3 for me because I do feel so much nostalgia for Haunt Season 2017. I like the variety that we see. Especially what makes this movie for me is the drone shot flying over the zombie run. Like, I was really feeling that moment. And then pretty much everything else is dreck. But, I mean, we saw Kobayashi eating brains. I didn't expect that.
Right, that stuff's kind of cool, yeah.
And, like, they go to a zombie concert, and yeah, it seemed like a fun time. But, yeah, it's all messed up by the theme of, like, brutalizing a traumatized woman.
Right. That's the whole, yeah, I agree. That too. Very mean-spirited.
And yeah, like, I don't know if you would really join Team Saw. It seems like not the thing that most people would do, but at least in Saw, it's like a 90% of the people do it. They wind up back in the cycle, so.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's like, you once you're the kind of person who seeks out Hellbent, you join Hellbent. You keep it going. But yeah, some movies, it's like you don't know what to expect, and then you watch it, and it could be a pleasant surprise. This was not. Like, I didn't have expectations. It still didn't meet the perception of expectations that I had. Like, this was a letdown. I did not expect these movies to be as bad as they are. And so maybe they warrant even lower ratings, because they're just not good. But I think I'm comfortable with the ratings that I gave.
Okay, yeah. Well, that was interesting, Brian. I mean, you know what? It's month. You never know what you're going to get with month. It's a wild card. And so as we wrap month, Brian, just kind of, I guess, our topic of the week, now that we're closing things out, are there any month movies that you wanted to pick but you didn't get to pick?
For me, the one that inspired the month, and maybe would have been a better end, is October Sky. The one about model rocketry in West Virginia. Like, it's kind of a biopic about Homer Hickam, who did end up being an astronaut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we hit 6 of the months, and we kind of set out a rule, I don't know if we said it on the pod or not, that, like, we wanted each movie to be a different month.
Right, no double dips.
And so I felt like, and then you also told me that we were going to end with October. So that took October off the table for me. And October Sky would have been my October pick if I had done in October. Although I also thought about Hunt for Red October. But you also took March. I was thinking about the Ides of March, which was a movie with, speaking of La La Land, whatever that dude's name is. Oh, wait, no. Is that Ryan Gosling? Yeah, I think it is Ryan Gosling. And then Born on the 4th of July would have been my July pick, because I don't think we had a July, did we?
No July. So I was definitely thinking of that one too.
Gotcha. And then I did have one for every month but the Born on the 4th of July was one that I almost picked. And then the other one that I almost picked that I actually might have, if not for the fact that I really wanted to talk about Pieces of April, and also it would have overlapped with one, is this movie that came out in 1998 called Late August, Early September. And it was either the first movie or one of the first movies of this director whose name I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce. It's Olivier Assayas, and he's a French director. And he made like some critical darlings of the 2010s, but like this was one of his first movies. It's called Late August, Early September. And the reason I would have picked it is because that's exactly when we're filming it and doing month, Brian, is late August, early September. So there you go. Those are some of my alternates.
Yeah, those would have been good. I'm not inclined to make this month expand into 2 months like we did last year.
The hardest one actually for me to find an example was June. There's not too many candidates for June. There's a 1956 film called D-Day, the 6th of June. That was the best that I could come up with. And my February was a cheat, sort of. So there's a film called The Black Coat's Daughter that like had an international release or like a working title of February. But if you search either IMDb or Letterboxd for February, it shows up as the first result. So it's like in their data somewhere as February, and it says alternate title February. So I would have probably tried to figure out why it was called February, but The Black Coat's Daughter would have been my February pick.
Gotcha. Yeah, similar boat to I had considered picking March of the Wooden Soldiers, but it seemed like that was an alternate release title. And most places it was called Babes in Toyland. I'm glad we went March of the Penguins. I liked those penguin movies. That was the month highlight for me.
Oh, yeah?
What about you? What was the best of month?
I think May December was the best one for us. It was the movie I liked the most out of the batch, and it's also, well, I don't know, Pieces of April is up there too, but I also felt like we got some interesting discussion out of us.
Yeah, I thought we had good talking points.
Although maybe not the monthiest one.
Well, okay, what was the monthiest one? What was the monthiest film?
Pieces of April might have been the monthiest one because it had April in the title, but it was very distinctly a November movie. I felt like we were spreading out. But then I guess this was the most like the month was October in the Houses of October. So I don't know. What do you think? What was the monthiest?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. Like, Houses October built, obviously it's set in October.
Mm-hmm.
But Pieces of April, very much set in a month. Like, you never doubt that it's November.
Right.
Which doesn't match the title, but is still monthy. September, I think, kind of captured the spirit of month, in that it's kind of dry, and it's like, you start to wonder why you're in a certain place. Like, am I just spinning my wheels?
What has brought me to month, in much the same way that, what's her name was wondering what brought me to this house and why am I stuck here?
So that kind of captured my feelings about the theme month.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. The one I was been telling my wife about it as we've been going because she thinks it's a funny idea for a theme month. And she thought that March of the Penguins was the biggest cheat out of all the ones we've done because it's not like, so I said, what about Pieces of April? Well, she's like, April is a name of a person, just like the name of a month. And so like in both cases, it's the name of a thing. But March of the Penguins, like the March there is very distinctly a different word than the month March. Like it's a word for marching. That's a thing that you do. That's not what the month March is. And I was like, okay, you feel more strongly about this than I do.
I can picture and like almost hear her saying that. That's funny. So now that we have escaped the bonds of month, Dan, what lies ahead?
So one fun thing about our podcast is we have guests every now and again, Brian. And another fun part about that is, for whatever reason, once we have someone on as a guest, they like to come back. They pretty much every single person who's been on the pod has at some point said like, hey, could I do that again sometime? Which I think is, I don't know, that's kind of cool that people want to join us again. And most of the people we've had on, we like having on. So there have been a bunch of people who we've been putting off having back on the pod because of scheduling, and we got a theme month and then this and that. So I think between now and actual spooky season, we're going to get some guests in here. I don't know if it'll be every week between now and spooky season, but certainly a couple of them. So I think next we're going to have my brother Will back for like the 5th time or something, maybe 6th. I don't really know. And we're going to talk about, I think the plan is we're going to talk about Warcraft, the game series, and watch some cutscenes from it. And then we're going to watch the movie Warcraft that came out in like, I don't know, the 90s or 2000s or something. And we'll watch that and review that. So Warcraft episode out of month, no longer talking about months, but this will almost be a mini theme month of guests, Brian. But it should be fun. So Warcraft next week.
Okay. I don't know Warcraft, so I'll get to learn. I know there's an orc on the box. I remember there was an orc in the trailer.
Okay. Well, that's a starting point, so we'll see. Alrighty. Talk to you later, Brian. Thank you again, listeners. This has been an interesting, an informative month.
Indeed. Nothing else like it. Join us again.